Happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we all kind of collected in the green room pre-event. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know, I'm Amelia Mink. I'm the founder of Data Science Connect. We're the largest data science community in the Southern United States. And thanks to this new virtual landscape we're in, we're able to be with folks from all over the world today. So sending a warm welcome to everyone from a lot of different time zones, including one of our very own panelists joining us from Israel. Ben says it's about 9 p.m. there, and I know it's about 2 p.m. in the East Coast. So today we're talking about privacy and security. We're collecting and leveraging more data than ever before, and privacy and security are racing to keep up. Today marks a special end-of-year panel for us where we'll discuss the considerations and challenges that data privacy poses across industries from the perspectives of some of the world's top data science leaders and executives. Thank you to the incredible speakers we are about to hear from for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us today. We also want to thank our presenting partner, Satori, for making today's executive panel possible. Satori created the first data security operations, or DataSecOps platform, which streamlines data access while automating access controls, security, and compliance. The Security Data Access Service is a universal visibility and control plane that allows you to oversee your data and its usage in real time and move away from ad hoc development and cumbersome processes. Satori secures access data for popular data stores such as Snowflake, Amazon Redshift, and for BI and analytic platforms including Tableau, Looker, and Power BI. We are proud and honored that today's program is presented by Satori. So let's do a round of virtual applause for them. That's my dogs. A few more things before we get started. Throughout today's panel, we'll run some related polls that you'll find in the lower right corner of your screen. I'll try to remember to let you know when we've posted a new one so you can participate that. And then we'll, I think you can actually see the results as folks submit them. But I'll try to, if we have a chance, I'll try to kind of keep you updated on the poll results. Also, while you're looking at the lower right corner of your screen, you'll see we have a Q&A feature where you can ask questions and then also upvote the ones that you want to make sure that we address. And so when there's some good pause moments, I'll make sure that your questions are addressed by our esteemed panel. Now it's time to hear from this panel. You'll see we had a great pre-panel call yesterday, and it was when you're pulling up all of these different incredible perspectives and minds, there's a method to the madness, but then everyone comes together and you realize that there's even more of a kind of complementary, diverse perspective sort of from each panelist. So you're in for a treat. I want to introduce you to Ben Herzberg, the chief scientist at Satori and author of Snowflake Security, Securing Your Snowflake Data Cloud, which you should all check out. Saurabh Mishra, head of large-scale shared platform at Visa. Sarah Saperstein, head of data science, cybersecurity, and fraud at MassMutual. Dr. Eric Schmidt, global director of marketing advanced analytics at Coca-Cola. And Devavroot Bapat, head of data science and product management at Johnson & Johnson. To kick things off, can each of you tell us a little bit about your background? Ben, can we start with you?
Sure. So I'm Ben. I've been with Satori for the last 2 years or so. I lead the research for Satori as chief scientist. Prior to that, I was leading the research at Imperva. So that was around application security and data security. And prior to that was leading development as well as offensive security. So my background is mainly security, development, but also was in charge of quite a lot of data in my time, especially at Imperva. So that's more or less about me.
Saurabh, you want to go next?
I'm still trying to figure out this
Beautiful
app.
weather going on in the background.
Yeah. So yeah, Saurabh, as usual from California, and that's what the weather is. I work in Visa. I had the data platform team here at the large scale shared platform. We do Hadoop, DB2, and security around it as part of this data platform. I started my career in, pretty much in Hortonworks. That's where the big data kicked in. first 100 member of Hortonworks, and then started learning towards it, all about big data, Hadoop, Hive, and exploration about it for last 7 years. I joined Visa 2 years before to lead this team into creating the new data platform for Visa.
I can go next. I'm Sarah Saperstein. I've been at MassMutual for 4 years. I had the data science and analytics group that supports our cybersecurity and fraud domains within the company. So we build out data science models on one side of my team, and we also build data analytics solutions on the other side of my team. And yeah, thanks to Amelia and Data Science Connect and Satori for organizing this, because it's going to be a really fun panel.
Thanks, Sarah. Eric?
I can go.
Or Dev, you want to go next?
All right, I'll go. I'm Eric Schmidt. I've spent most of my career in the business analytics, marketing science, decision science space. I've also worked in IT on the IT side, and I am currently, as Amelia mentioned at the beginning, the director for global marketing advanced analytics, and doing a lot of work there with our data. We have a sister data science team within the enterprise, but really looking at how do we apply data science to marketing challenges, marketing needs.
Yeah, it's going to be a really cool perspective. Dev, last but not least.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting. This is Dev Bapat. I lead the data science and engineering and the product management group for medical devices, mostly focused on commercial analytics, but also the last mile on R&D. Prior to this, I built the supply chain data science and engineering group, and I had prior experiences in consulting and industrial equipment.
Thanks, Dev. So we have a lot of different industries today as well. So to jump right in, we have, last night I looked up some stats to sort of be the precursor to this question, and found that we're producing 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day now, and have produced over 90% of the world's data in the last 2 years alone. Sarah, this is truly your wheelhouse. What do you see as some of the challenges that organizations are facing when managing large amounts of data, especially as it relates to security and privacy of customer data?
Yeah, this is a question that's really in a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. So being in insurance, we are in a really heavily regulated industry. Being on a data science team supporting cybersecurity and fraud, we care a lot about the security of our data. And being data scientists, we also need access to a lot of really sensitive data. We build user behavior analytics models on our employee data. And, we deal with a very large amount of data. And at MassMutual, we also want to make sure that we are protecting our customers' data. And, given the kind of long tenure that we have customers for, that trust is really critical. I would say, too, that in data science, that kind of public trust of the data science solutions and the way that we're handling data and protecting that privacy is really critical to the success of data science going forward as a field. So it just, all of this really comes together. So some of the kind of challenges that I see are, especially when you are dealing with a very large amount of data, knowing your inventory, both in terms of sort of like the production level data, and labeling the data as whether it is restricted or confidential or public, and then also the things that are outside the kind of established production databases. So for like a data science team, I think it's pretty common that organizations will hire data scientists first, and then afterwards realize, okay, we need the data engineering to support that. And even if you kind of hire both at the same time, data scientists are often kind of pulling in data sources to experiment with it before it becomes productionalized. And so you might have all of these like kind of one-off ingestion pipelines off to the side, and you need to track those and make sure that you're ensuring the privacy of the data there as well as in production. So I think that there's this kind of talent gap in data engineering. It's hard enough to find data scientists. It's even harder, I think, to find data engineers. So you really need to kind of get that talent pipeline going and make sure that everyone's on board with the idea of like ensuring that you're addressing the tech debt, ensuring that you're finding all those different ingestion pipelines, get everyone really excited about data privacy. We're really lucky at MassMutual that the data science team is very excited about data privacy, fairness and accountability and transparency. And so it's been easy to get everyone in data science to be really excited about, making sure that we're encrypting our data, working through inventorying all of the data pipelines and locations that we store data so that we can make sure that we're handling it appropriately. And then I'd say another kind of big challenge is data usage and disposition. As data scientists, we don't ever want to get rid of data because you might need it in the future. And sometimes, maybe the data is no longer that relevant. In insurance, we do have a really long timeline that data is useful. So we have some research projects where we're looking at 20 years worth of application data because we're looking at mortality outcomes. And so, understanding what's the right kind of fit for purpose of the data, what's the right disposition schedule? Is it something that we need to keep around for 20 years? Is it something that we can only keep, it's okay if we dispose of it after 7 years? Because you really want to minimize that kind of surface of risk with your data. And then the last challenge that I see is remaining current with the evolving privacy legislation, especially with companies that have a global footprint, keeping track of that globally as well. And I anticipate a lot of changes, and there have been recent changes and updates to that. So it's a lot to keep track of, and you want to make sure that you're anticipating what's coming down the pipeline.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned yesterday when we were kind of doing our panel intros, just this bottom-up approach that MassMutual is taking now to really champion data privacy and security which is, we've seen that bottom-up approach in data and data science across industries and organizations. And it was neat to hear you speak to sort of a similar approach with data privacy and security.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of change management related to it because it does take both a bottom up and a top down. And so, for the databases in production, there's been a big effort in the data engineering org to use voltage encryption to encrypt data. And it's very, like, the tooling makes it very easy, and it has been seamless for the data science team. But then there are these other pipelines, and just, I think the same way that you want to have people kind of self-volunteer as cyber champions, cybersecurity champions, you also want people to identify as, data privacy and protection champions, and just get kind of that culture. Because then when you need to make changes, people will be really on board with it and understand the importance.
It becomes a cultural norm and less of maybe even the prickler in the organization who's that might have been the old kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, especially, we have a lot of social security numbers that have historically been used for insurance. And so, there's been a big effort to move away from that. But there's also a cultural shift of getting people to realize, like, not to include social security numbers in any emails, especially like insurance agents, I think, traditionally would have included those, and we didn't really, 10 years ago, didn't really think about that. But now we know, like, that we need to protect that more and any other kinds of PII. So people are a lot more mindful of that, I think, now, and considering, like, do I need to put this information into this communication? And so even that kind of, like, individual level awareness can go a long way.
Right. Is anyone else dealing with, can anyone kind of add to the challenges that Sarah's just talked about, or add some different ones?
Sure. I think Sarah covered most of them. I think for us, volume is not generally a big deal of a challenge. Variety is a larger challenge. I think the dichotomy that Sarah mentioned is what we address as well. On the one hand, we want to have patient outcome improvement, and in some cases, like in our eye care business, we want to improve the patient experience. But that becomes a bit of a catch-22 where you need the data to build the models, but then you have to go through significant you have to address significant considerations before you use the data. And it's one of those things where patient identifier, or PHI, protected health information, is a big deal in healthcare industry. HIPAA has actually laid out 18 attributes that comprise PHI, but and you definitely don't want to trip over those attributes. But the challenge is they are subject to interpretation in some cases. So that's on the one side, but on the other side, a natural inclination of a data scientist is always data enrichment to draw better insights. So you might be in a situation where you have two pieces of de-identified data, but you can still merge them, do the feature engineering, and still come up with a feature set that can actually then reverse engineer the patient information, which is something we want to try to avoid. Similarly, I think to the point that Sarah mentioned, one-off experiments, a lot of flat files, it becomes harder from a security perspective as we are taking hospital data, surgical information, to ensure that the same level of scrutiny and rigor and security is applied on those one-off experiments, because companies like Johnson and Johnson, when you have 450,000 products across 121 countries, it's going to be harder to monitor and have one standard. So at least we try to make sure that there are a certain sets of standards that are locally approved, and you have to adhere to those standards. And I think the last one, I think Sarah mentioned as well, is like from a data lifecycle perspective, we've spent a lot of time on identification, ingestion, feature engineering, and insights and data operationalization. But the last step around archival and purging also becomes equally important, given that we have product information, experiment, clinical, preclinical information, post-clinical outcomes, patient outcomes, etc. And what is the retention period? What is the security associated with that? All of it also becomes important for us.
Absolutely.
I'll add one point to this, right? Like for everything what you guys covered was pretty much what we always faced when we started with the PI, or personal information data in Visa. The main challenge that we had was the volume as well, right? Like in its scale of 200 petabyte or 300 petabyte, when you start doing security around it on logical separation, and trying to see if you can do row level, column level security for people to access what they really want to access, and make sure that it's auditable, it becomes a really hard challenge to solve. So, usually what we started at ending up with logical separation of complete environments, right? Like, we started creating boundaries which people cannot cross. So we started creating encryption and decryption algorithms which they cannot get access to the keys if they really don't need to. Now, we sustained that for like 1 or 2 years, and then we quickly realized that, de-identifying is the only way to make sure that PI, or personal information, is not getting used completely. So we had to create a separate duplicate environment for people to start using de-identified data, so that they don't get access to identified data, which is pretty much can be backtracked using the compute they already had in hands. So we completely physically had to isolate it and started cutting off people's access from the encrypted data, so that they completely depend on the identified data for doing their day-to-day machine learning or feature engineering work. Well, we divided the use case into like two categories: permissioned and non-permissioned. Pretty much all analytics and machine learning by default get access to non-permissioned use cases where they're not allowed to access encrypted PAI or PI. So that one of the challenge gives you one perspective in volume.
Thanks, Rory.
I'll just add a quick note on this, and that is, so far we've been talking about how do we handle the data internally within our own organizations. But in a lot of cases, at least from our perspective, from my perspective where I work, we partner a lot with third parties and other folks who hold data, and often work with other partners that help us analyze and look at our own data or other data that we're tasked with being responsible for as well. So who are your partners and what are their practices and how trustworthy are those? There's a good example of this in recent history with Cambridge Analytica and how that might go awry. So that is also a consideration as this ever-evolving landscape of data and data volume and data complexity is changing, and managing all that is something that we have to think a lot about, I think, as well.
That's a great point, Eric. You're as vulnerable as the folks that you're dealing with in the business of data. So that's a really good point. So
I would just like to say a couple of things as well. First of all, I would like to say, Sarah, about the data security champions. That it's really cool. It really reminds me of the shift to DevSecOps in application development, where part of this was adding security champions to the development teams. That was really a great step for collaboration, to speak the same language, etc. And I think that collaboration between security and data, and security and data analysts, data scientists, is really, really important. And I think that it's a great step that can help both education and collaboration of the data stakeholders, the data consumers, the other data stakeholders in the organization. Some challenges that I've seen when I was owning a lot of data, and others as well, I would just mention two of them. One is knowing where the sensitive data is, especially when we were talking about the variety of data and the volume, but also the velocity, like data keeps on being added. Sometimes you have, even in a nice structured data warehouse, you have somewhere a column where event data goes in, semi-structured data goes in, and then all of a sudden different event data starts going in, and you don't know that you have any sensitive data in there, or other situations where you don't know where the sensitive data is. So that's really challenging when the data keeps on changing, being enriched, pouring from all different sources, and reminds me of some stories from my past. And another thing is that as a data owner, it's really hard sometimes to make decisions about the risk versus value of the company. Like, you need to have a tribunal of the company. Sometimes it's very hard for you to understand, okay, different business units want a piece of my data that contains sensitive data, and I know that it's sensitive and it's risky, but on the other hand, it really solves a big problem for them. How do I weigh all of these problems? It's also sometimes a great challenge.
Yeah, another point with that too is if you have more people who have access to that data, that's a bigger attack surface for an attacker to come in and take over one of those accounts. So one approach is to only provision access, kind of just in time when they need it, and then revoke it again, so that if those accounts did get compromised, the attackers would not be able to then access the data. But yeah, then you have to make sure that you have the kind of like machine learning in place to be able to provision and deprovision in real time like that, so people aren't waiting around in order to be able to move forward on their work.
Yeah, and to add to kind of piggyback on what Sarah just said, this past year we've seen a giant surge in high-profile ransomware attacks and other cybersecurity incidents, including the Colonial Pipeline hack that took down the largest fuel pipeline and left many of us in the East Coast without gas for weeks. What are the top concerns from the regulatory compliance and security team in your organizations, and how does that affect your role? Dev, you want to start with this one?
Sure.
And
I think
Dev, before you get started, I do want to say, just on all the speakers' behalfs, I was meant to say this at the beginning, that everything discussed today represents the speaker's opinion, not the opinion or perspective of any employers here. So I meant to clear that out at the beginning.
So I think when I look at privacy and security as two different things, right? I think there is always a healthy tension. There is always a balance that we have to strike. And what I mean by that is the role for privacy and insecurity as well is data protection, protection of the information that is specific to a patient or a surgeon. And lastly, but probably most also equally important, is protection of company reputation. That's on one hand. And on the other hand, the role of a data scientist is actually to always harvest as much information as possible to make their models complete. So that, and in a healthcare environment, which it generally tend to uh, be a more risk-averse environment for all the obvious reasons, because you want to make sure that the product, I mean, inherently, healthcare industry has been brought up in such a way that any product that you are sending out in the market has to improve the quality of life or has to improve the patient outcome. Otherwise, you don't even send a product out. Contrast that with data science and digital product management, where you constantly have to experiment, you fail in the marketplace, and you learn. So generally, privacy, security, regulatory are not so keen on that experimental method. So that, I think, is the first challenge that we face a lot in the data science community in healthcare. Um, some of the things, and then on the security side, I think you already mentioned about a constant attack on infrastructure. I mean, we are like our ERPs and others sometimes can be internal, but most of the companies migrate towards cloud. So the need is then to make sure that we have self-serve design services. How do we create an abstraction layer? How do we make sure that the relevant services from the cloud service providers are added? And then back to Sarah's point, we also I mean, there is a specific concern around user access, because one of the things is we generally tend to draw a line between commercial and clinical. So one of the things that regulatory and security always try to balance is, if we are getting certain information for clinical purposes, that information must not be used for commercial purposes. So how do you kind of balance that? It's something that the regulatory team works very closely with us, and sometimes that results into some good discussions, but eventually the positive is the product may be delayed, but the product that comes out is a product that is generally received well by the customer and is adhered to for all the privacy and security compliance.
That's an interesting approach about separating the commercial and that's a good rule of thumb. The personal kind of private data, and then the.
I mean, you don't want, generally, if a patient had signed off. So there are occasions when we are trying to sell something directly to a patient or a customer, like a contact lens or like a Neutrogena or Aveeno. We may get the patient email address and physical address, so we can start shipping them the product directly, and we get their consent so that we can send marketing material to them. But on the other hand, for our pharmaceutical and medtech, we generally, I mean, information that is required for clinical purposes is to improve the patient outcome and not to commercialize that product and sell it directly to the patient or sell it directly to the surgeon. So that's why we always have that clear line of demarcation.
And so we touched on, kind of organically touched on PII and a lot of other kind of personally identifiable data. Ben, what are best practices or suggestions for kind of documenting and storing or finding and documenting the sensitive data? And I'm curious to hear from, I know we've got fintech and healthcare on the line, and insurance, marketing analytics. Oh, Ben, I think you're muted. Let's see. Yes, you're muted. I might have muted you.
So, okay. I would say, first of all, in many organizations, and definitely not all of them, but in many organizations, I would start with the creating documentation for the metadata. In many organizations, there are grand attempts and they fail. To create a single source of truth for the data and data catalogs and such. And if an organization starts at this, I would say set achievable goals for everything you do in life, right? But in many cases, I've seen that the attempts of creating such systems were too big of steps, that they were either too hard to set up initially or too hard to maintain in the long run. So I would say start with something and grow from it. That's one thing. I would be careful, at least for my past, with documentation and assumptions that are human driven. Not that I don't trust people, but in many cases, there were questionnaires and things that were distributed to ease the setup of such inventories and catalogs that were distributed and were relying too much on the human element and on teams knowing what data they have and where and what types, which parts of it are sensitive. And then I had data scientists in my group, for example. It's not always that easy for them to know what all the data sets they have in all the projects they were working on this year were, and that leads to perhaps the last one, which is to try to make it agile and continuous as possible. So, for example, if you're trying to inventorize your data once a quarter or once a year, and you're relying on periodic scanning like that, that may not last when data. If you have an organization where data keeps on changing and moving and transformed, so the most continuous and incremental solutions to classifying the data, understanding what types of data you have, where they will work best, so you don't have gaps in periodic gaps in your knowledge of where sensitive data. And one last thing, once you know where your sensitive data is, that's a great place to focus your resources on. So because you usually don't have enough data security resources and privacy resources to get the best, like all the audit hours and all the controls and everything to all of your systems. So start with where your crown jewels are, whatever it is for your business.
We have a good question from the audience.
For us.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, for us, it was pretty much the other way around. We told our business analyst and, users or machine learner that this data does not have anything sensitive other than whatever is sensitive is already encrypted. So, and exposed that catalog in front of them, so the, de-identified version of it, even though it says social security, but it's completely de-identified. So, you cannot take it back. It's one-way hash. So we told them where the data is, where we told them this is de-identified data. So there, that's one way we handled it. The other way of handling it is like, as you rightly said, Ben, right? Like cataloging, big data or the data at scale is an infinite problem, right? It cannot be solved. It has to be iterative. It has to be exposing that catalog information directly to the end user is only way to do it, because they would see what's existing today and they would see what's not existing today, and they work towards the not existing or use the existing. So exposing them and asking them to adopt it over a period of time and continuously modifying it over an agile fashion is the only way to deal with telling them where the data is for BI.
Yeah, having that visibility can make all the difference. Circling back to something that Eric had said earlier, in addition to the inventorying your internal data that Ben was talking about, having that inventory of like your third party risk. We recently built a scorecard to help various people in the company to be able to kind of keep track of like the data privacy from third parties. And that's been hugely helpful for them to kind of see where they stand and where are areas that they can push on and improve. And without that kind of visibility to be able to track the data, it would be a lot harder to know like what steps to take to keep improving.
And what are some quick steps to take for folks who are interested in kind of adopting a scorecard approach?
Yeah, so having like a ranking system, having the classification system, a lot of the inventorying stuff that that Ben was talking about, understanding like, okay, is this, confidential data? Is this restricted? And kind of like a trust but verify for your third parties. We inventory, what they say, but then we also kind of track for ourselves as well. So there's some self-identification, but there's also, scanning of data to see and to understand, like, where are we, basically how is the data coming in and out? And, other ways too, of like evaluating where your data leakage could be. So for example, putting systems in place for your email to detect if there's something sensitive that's being sent. So having like filters in place where if you detect there's an SSN in an email, having some way to maybe like quarantine that email until you get approval that yes, that's necessary for a business process. Or even, building machine learning approaches to help evaluate whether this is like a legit use of including some of that PII in the email, or whether it's like not a legitimate use, and then have it automatically, filtered out and not send.
So we have a good question from the audience that has some upvotes too. For anyone who's comfortable answering this one, how did the increased data privacy challenges and regulations impact the whole new wave of this work from home culture, especially among data scientists themselves? It's a good question. I mean, while you guys are thinking, my immediate thoughts are we're producing so much more data now in the virtual landscape that we're in. So I would imagine that's impacted.
I can comment on what I think it might be addressing, which is, is the data necessarily less secure if we're accessing it remotely from our home office versus in the building?
Totally.
I don't have the IT engineering security background to answer that, but I can say that, I mean, we've been doing this now for close to 2 years, and I think a lot of companies are thinking through how to continue on this work from home or remote working way of working. It makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So that by itself, I think, is kind of a proof point of, and I'm not saying this to say that there aren't risks associated with it, but obviously we do have the ability to do so and still maintain a certain level of security, I think, as much as we would within the four walls of the office building.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Eric.
I think that first of all, it's a challenge in everything, right? The move to work from home and the security effect it has on employees and data exposure, etc. I think it would be important to make sure there is no, in the same way there's shadow IT, there's shadow data processing, like downloading CSV to your file and then running the model and such. I think that it would be important to set policies around that in organizations that are heavy data users, that are using data, which is probably most organizations nowadays, to make sure that wrong behavior is enforced, so that wrong behavior is not allowed. What I mean is, I'm trying to think while I'm speaking, but what I mean is, if I have a desktop workstation at my office and I log into it and I'm doing work from office, I may get into bad habits of saving data sets on my personal work machine, on my workstation, and starting to run. I want to run a network graph instead of running it on online on the public on the company owned by VPC. I will run it in my local machine, unsupervised, not as in unsupervised learning, right? Like downloading data set, running, building a model from it, whatever it is that I'm doing. And I think that it would be a good time to get data scientists, data analysts, any data consumer to better practices around what data they take away and put on their laptops, on their desktops, etc.
And so Ben, just to follow up really quickly on that, I think a more important, let's say, factor in that is the move to the cloud, because whether or not, so pre-pandemic, we were doing that, the download thing, and then it walks out the door on your laptop or on a thumb drive or whatever. So I think really good point, and that is one of the key risks. But I think the thing that actually is kind of the main driver for security around that is keeping the data behind the the security firewall in the cloud. And I think the more that companies move to that cloud environment, the better security. Again, this is my uninformed business analytics kind of point of view on it. So yeah.
And so
it's mostly is like if you avoid it's mostly is if you avoid download of data into direct laptop, which you use it for a day-to-day purpose. It's just to not avoid it, to still cut it off. Right? Like there is no, from a zero tolerance perspective, from security perspective, it becomes very important to just cut it off, that channel where people can download locally, and then work around it, right, to see how they can access it and still do their job effectively. So that's one of the rule which will apply more and more with this work from home culture, going forward.
I think about that. I think that one of the I think that we're moving to in data operations the same way that DevOps went to DevSecOps. In DataOps, we're moving to DataSecOps, meaning basically that we understand that as an industry that security has to be a first-class citizen in the data operations, and part of it is that security and data needs to work together, and the data teams need to work together, so that security also needs to understand that it needs to be an enabler as well. It can't slow down the time to value from data as well. The same thing exactly happened with when applications started to be deployed every day or several times a day. And at the beginning, security was, no, we need 2 weeks to test everything. And, but, things changed, and we need to understand how to do that. And now I think the same is happening with data. And security needs to understand that as well, and to enable all of these processes.
I think that's really key, enablement and automation, to make it really easy to do the right thing and make it really easy to kind of start with security in mind.
And similar to the work from home landscape, would you say there are similar best practices to sort of self-service access best practices for data scientists?
You want me to take that one?
Yes, Eric, thank you.
I'll go real
you,
quick.
Eric?
I have just a quick, it's like bullet point. So, self-service, obviously. So coming from the business side, we're under a lot of pressure to move quickly and come up with groundbreaking, revolutionary insights that's going to drive value and et cetera, and do it tomorrow kind of stuff. So self-service is one way that we think we can do that. I think that's true. But I think, obviously you can't have kind of uncontrolled chaos, and that's where you get into this discussion around security, et cetera. So I think it starts with like the use case. So what really is the business need that a self-service model will enable? And then I think it really starts with getting that data right. So getting not only the right data, the quality correct, but also have those governance practices put in place so that there is a standard definition, or you have standard ways of looking at the data, so you avoid later confusion if you scale it up, and then having good operations behind it. And I think it's also a mindset shift from looking at things from a project perspective, and specifically, and I think most companies, and I think IT falls into this as well, where things are budgeted and executed at a project level or on a project basis. And we need to think about data and the capability as a product, an ongoing continuous capability. And I think when we make that mindset shift, that will enable us to do this self-service approach. And I think we spoke about this earlier, about having maybe an ML enabled provisioning process or something like that. I think the quote one-click approach to standing up provisioning like a POC environment for, hey, I've got a proof of concept I want to do on this business problem, instead of the 6-week process to get it through whatever historical process we have. Can I just go and make a quick request through an online help portal, and then I've got my environment stood up and I can start working right away. Mm-hmm. So the other real quick thing is, I think on top of that, it's having sample. Having sample. That's the connectivity world we're in. My phone is talking to my Macintosh, and I was jamming to some tunes earlier that apparently I had way too loud. So anyway, having sample query and code, like a code database, as well as those data dictionaries, and having a business dictionary for the data scientists, right? So having as much kind of that meta information and as much standardization as you can without putting handcuffs on people, but more as an enabler to make sure that the self-service runs smoothly, I think are key things that will make that work.
Business dictionary is a great idea. That you should coin that. So we've only got a couple minutes left. As we kind of close out today's conversation, let's talk about just emerging trends that you guys see, and also just your advice to organizations in security and privacy. Trends and advice for how to continue to innovate while addressing security and privacy, and then trends around data security and privacy.
Yeah, so if you think about what happened in last couple of years, right? GDPR came into effect, then suddenly CCPA came into effect. 2021 CCPA 2.0 came into effect, right? And then by 2023, there will be something called a CDPA, the Consumer Data Protection Act, will come into effect, where you can literally opt out for any business to use your data for your personal gain, right? Or or monetary gains. So those kind of regulations are coming in the nation, as well as outside the nation. Different countries like India, China, Brazil, all of them, Canada is supposed to renew their 20 years old Data Protection Act. So a lot of this localization will take into effect in coming years, as per me, and then the new year. So the focus should be around that, and as well as all what we know with what happened with Log4j right before Christmas, right? So the whole breach are increasing, the any given even with a logging kind of class, people are finding loopholes and trying to get in the system, right? So those are the two things which I would say would be very would be the trend going forward. More and more protection about data consumer, how to consume their personal data, and more attack and zero tolerance of security would be key in next coming era. Yeah.
Well said, so Rob.
Anyone else have any sort of?
I'll say, I think from a trends perspective, I think there's going to be a race for first party data. So I think you're already seeing this in companies going out and trying to encourage their consumers or users to opt in for information and then create their own view of who they are. And then along with that, I think we'll see more activity around this concept of federated learning, where you've got maybe different first party data holders then looking at pulling data together in a federation to understand a broader understanding of who the consumer is or who the user or individual is, but do it in a way that still maintains the privacy and security. So I think those will be trends that we see, and then how do we do that so that we don't run afoul of ethics and privacy. I think will be an interesting thing to see how it goes.
Great.
I think that it's not really a new trend. It's more the continuation of organizations that will implement data democratization when it fits, of course, the organization goals. But those who will make sure that more people can be data consumers, valuable data consumers, and both, as Eric said about the last question about the self-service, give them the tools to understand what's the data that they're querying, how do they get to good results immediately, but also, of course, about security. Or the organization or the security of organizations. In many cases, security is not deterministic enough around the data access, and sometimes data scientists or analysts will request access to something and they will get it. Sometimes they will not. Sometimes the approval may not be clear enough, and the organizations that will have clear guidelines and policies around data access, they will, quote unquote, win, because they can also automate that, and as part of the self-service, also transform that into self-service access. So I can say why I need the data, and I'm automatically getting it without waiting 2 days for an approval, if it's something that's logical for me to get. And that again takes it to what I said earlier about striking the balance between fast data access versus security. So that's how I see it.
These are good parting words. Well, we're going to hang on to Ben as we wrap this panel, and he'll answer a few more questions for us. We can learn a bit more about Satori, but huge round of applause to our incredible panel. Thank you for joining us. I know it's the end of the year, and thank you to everyone who joined us, our audience as well. I think I'm going to copy Sarah and Mass Mutual's mission, and may we all, as we produce more and more data, may we all be champions for data security and privacy, and protecting our customers and our clients and all the sensitive data. So thank you, everyone. And Ben, I think you've got some questions too. So when we keep you on,
thank you.
I'll include the audience questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Eric. Thank you,
Thank you.
Saurabh.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Debs.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
By the way, I see we have an unanswered question. Maybe I can.
We do.
Now
Can you
that I
answer
have
it?
no competition. Now that I have no competition, I can try to answer it from
Now
Richard.
I've gotten rid of them. That's what.
No, this was, by the way, awesome. It was really interesting for me. I hope it was interesting for everybody. So the question is, how do you think the security challenges affect outsourced ML task work, where many annotators are also working from home? Are companies more or less likely to outsource as security becomes a bigger challenge? So I wouldn't say that it's. I think that at least from my experience, when you outsource such tasks or data sets for when you outsource them, that's one of the basic things. You outsource anonymized data, and then it matters less. If the annotators are working from home, I mean, at least in all the cases I know of, working on desensitized data and de-anonymized data, and so I don't think it will affect it. But again, that's at least my opinion.
Richard, did that answer your question?
It made him laugh. It made him laugh.
Also, we have Ben and his team have 2 webinars coming up on Thursday and Friday, where you can see more from Ben, learn more about his book, more about security and application to Snowflake and Redshift, which I know is very near and dear to a lot of our community. Ben, can you share more on that?
Yeah, sure. So I can share screen, I guess.
Yes. Kind of hover at the top and you'll see the share screen.
Wait, that's a bit tricky. So,
and maybe I'll hide my screen. I'll take myself.
I don't know how that will work, but let's give it a try. Chrome tab. So
look at the top.
I think that.
Perfect.
So I will not give the full product pitch of what Satori does. Although, if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out to Satori or to me, and I'll direct you to the people who do this the best. But I will give a short explanation about what Satori and the 2 exciting events we have tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So the core capabilities of Satori is continuous data discovery and classification. So we monitor data access, and as soon as there is new sensitive data, we classify it either according to our out-of-the-box classification or what the organization can define custom classification and understand where sensitive data is, who is accessing this sensitive data, and when was it first accessed, etc. So you can have compliance reports about it. You can investigate into what types of sensitive data each team was using or each user was using, and you can set access controls accordingly. We provide dynamic data masking as well as other types of granular data access policies, attribute-based access control, role-level security, dynamically separated from the data infrastructure. So that is another one of our several capabilities that we're doing. So, for example, for dynamic masking, you do not need to configure exact locations. You can set dynamic masking on all of the PHI, PII, or specific types, and set different dynamic masking rules and set them to run according to the security policies. We enable delivering of self-service access control and automated workflow of data access approval. without the need of the data engineering team to set things manually in data infrastructures such as Snowflake, Redshift, Postgres, and others. We provide compliance reporting, such as where is your sensitive data, what sensitive data was added and when, and who is accessing sensitive data. So all of this happens continuously and in an automated way as data is being accessed. So Satori sits between the data consumers and the data, and we do not change anything in the data consumer end. We do not install any drivers, any agents, and we do not add anything or change anything in your data platforms. No added users, no added data warehouses, schemas, objects, and you don't need to change anything in the way you're running the queries. But when your queries are running through Satori, we are inspecting them and doing all of the things that I mentioned. And as a platform, it also integrates with identity providers and the data catalogs and the other systems, for example, for workflow automation. So basically, these are the data platforms we are working with. Some of them are, some are also in preview, so you can visit our website or contact us if your favorite data platform is not in place. And so we sit between those data consumers and, of course, others, data consuming applications, and, of course, others, and the data platforms. So as promised, we have two really exciting events. Tomorrow, I'm speaking about Snowflake security, zero to Snowflake security in 45 minutes, which is basically some of the quick things, or maybe not so quick, but important things you need to do to make your Snowflake environment more secure, and with showing that on the Snowflake side, as well as showing some of the Satori capabilities live in a live demo. And my colleague Ashish, the next day, will do the same for Amazon Redshift. So that's going to be Friday. So that's 9 a.m. PT, 12 p.m. ET. Mine is Thursday, and his is Friday. So those are the two events. Of course, there's the book that you mentioned, and that's also really exciting, published by A-Press. And if you would like to test Satori, we have a free trial in our website, and you can also watch a pre-recorded demo or set up a demo on our website. I think.
Thank you, Ben.
That's it. I didn't, give the full the full pitch, but I hope that helped understand what Satori does.
Left them wanting more, and like Ben mentioned, the upcoming tomorrow's webinar with Ben, zero to secure Snowflake in 45 minutes, is the link is in the call to action button at the bottom, and then the Friday webinar is similar, but an application to Amazon Redshift. So depending on what your platform is, tune in 45 minutes and you'll be zero to secure.
And it's going to be fun. At least the Friday one, the one that I'm not doing, is going to be fun. No, I hope both of them are going to be fun, conversational, going to be, at least for my preparation, it's going to be pretty much hands-on, not many slides, but a slide or two, and then moving to Snowflake to show how you do those things. And then when getting to the Satori part, it's more of a demo, less of slide after slide.
And you can reach out to Ben on LinkedIn also. And then we'll follow up with an email, and I can include his contact information. So
all right.
We'll see you on Thursday and Friday.
So just one last sentence is I really enjoyed today's discussion. It was great.
Today was great. Thank you for joining us tonight, Ben, and we'll see everyone tomorrow for the Snowflake webinar, and then on Friday for the Redshift webinar. And then to learn more about Satori, schedule a demo, reach out to Ben, and then check out his book as well on Amazon.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Christmas. Happy New Year's. Bye.
Bye-bye.